Hi, everyone. I am Connie Ryan, Executive Director of Interfaith Alliance of Iowa, and this is What's Happening, which is a weekly online forum where I am honored to talk with leaders about a variety of issues that impact our communities, our state, and everyday Iowans. If you are on Facebook or on YouTube, you can put comments and questions in the comment section there, and hopefully we'll get to those. Um, so in the news, there has been a lot of talk about workers at John Deere facilities in Iowa, Illinois, and Kansas that are on strike. That began October 14th and impacts thousands of Iowa workers in Ankeny, Davenport, Dubuque, Ottumwa, and the Quad Cities, and Waterloo. And we're going to talk about the strike itself. We're going to talk about their grievances, but also we're going to just talk about worker rights in general, what's behind strikes historically, and this what the differences between striking and other actions maybe that workers often can take. And I'm very pleased to have my friend Charlie Wishman, who is the president of the Iowa Federation of Labor, AFL-CIO. And Charlie, welcome to What's Happening.
Hi, Connie. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So tell folks just a little bit about yourself personally, your upbringing, your family, your connection to labor, whatever you want to share.
Sure. So, I guess sometimes I feel a little bit like an anomaly in some ways, in that, if you're, many union members are second generation or third generation union members, and that's not actually where I came from. I kind of came from a different sort of working class background, but I grew up on a kind of my first, I don't know, introduction, I guess, so to speak. I think seeing kind of the larger picture of labor, and growing up in the 1980s, and we lived on a small cattle farm just south of Mason City, and I remember at the same time where you had the farm crisis that was going on, you also had IBP, Iowa processors, trying to bust unions all over this state. And I remember very clearly when I was young, actually it was my mother telling me, there really isn't much difference. There's really no difference between the forces that are keeping us down as small farmers and the forces that are keeping striking Hormel workers in Mason City that were down. And so, I mean, that was kind of, the first, kind of thoughts that I had on it. But a lot of, where I come to a lot of my other strong working class beliefs and solidarity comes just from life experience, ended up losing that farm, and my mom had to move. My dad left, and my mom had to move to Mason City and took a minimum wage job and was supporting my sister and I on a minimum wage job. And I really got to see that, I can't remember what minimum wage was, $4.25 maybe. Yeah. That certainly wasn't enough to raise a family on. And so many issues that we care about in organized labor aren't just things, contracts, arbitrations, grievances, and that sort of thing. Number one, it's about building a larger movement of workers to fight for justice and equality in the workplace, and dignity and respect is really what most of these things come down to. That's where I learned a lot of that is through a lot of life experiences, and especially, watching, like I said, my mom try and raise us on, with no help, on minimum wage, going from minimum wage job to, crappy job after crappy job, and eventually going back to college and really working her way up. Not that easy for a lot of folks, and I would venture to say that right now, somebody who would have, similar circumstances would have it even tougher than somebody in the early 90s.
Yeah, and I don't know if you want to share who your mom is, but she is a formidable person in
Sure. Yeah,
as well.
yeah, I have no problem doing that. And really, she is biased, but I think she's a pretty special individual. Like I said, she worked crappy job after crappy job, and went back to college, and eventually director of the community kitchen of North Iowa, and just a little bit after, a little bit over 10 years, I think, after all that happened with losing the farm and everything like that. Some people approached her about running for office, and she was never the type of person to ever really think about running for office. She was kind of the one who spent the time in the headquarters organizing and things like that. But she ran for office when there was a special election in 2002. Her name is Amanda Reagan. We have got different last names because she's remarried. And she won that special election and has been in the Iowa Senate through good times and bad, and especially bad as of late. But for coming up on 20 years now.
Yeah, she is an amazing voice in the Iowa Senate for not only for worker rights, but just on so many progressive issues. So wanted you to catch us up. I don't know that there's been much change over the last week, but catch us up on where things are with the worker strike at John Deere and what the current situation is.
Sure. So initially, so this all started back, I don't know when, John Deere and the UAW started to negotiate. But eventually something called a TA, or a tentative agreement, was brought to the membership. And that happened on a Sunday night in October. I'm trying to remember the exact date. But that was voted down by I believe it was, October 16th, 17th, I believe. That was when the first tentative agreement was voted down. And it was voted down at a rate of, first of all, really, really high voter turnout amongst the UAW. And it was turned down 90-10. So that tells me that there were lots and lots of pieces of this contract that were unacceptable to UAW members. And I think there's something larger going on here too, which I can come back to. The negotiators from the UAW, which includes people elected to a bargaining committee, as well as local presidents here. And in Iowa, it's Ankeny, it's Ottumwa, it's Waterloo, it's Dubuque, it's the Quad Cities. And then over on the Illinois side, there's some Deere locals as well. There's a one in Kansas, and then two very small locals in Denver and one in Atlanta. But either way, they all had a chance to vote on a second tentative agreement, which came up last Tuesday. That was a much closer margin at 55-45, but the membership still voted it down. And, ultimately, I think that there's a lot of perception out there that, these decisions are made by union bosses and things like that. But ultimately, this was the membership's choice to vote it up or vote it down, and they chose to, by a much narrower majority than the first vote, but chose to vote it down over a number of factors I think still outstanding in the contract. But really, one consistent theme, and I've been to many, many picket lines all over this state since this has started. One consistent thing that I think that you can draw upon, and when you just talk to folks, is that they know how much money that they have made for Deere. They know how much money that Deere executives and the CEO of Deere have made, and they think that something is extremely out of whack with the how much Deere is bringing home compared to what they are bringing home, because they are the ones who created all this massive wealth for Deere. I think it was put best to me by one young brother on a line in Ankeny. He said, "Look, we'll go back to making Deere billions of dollars. Don't worry. We're just looking for our fair share of this."
Yeah, and much has been noted, at least in the press, and I always give that a little bit of a caveat, since the press doesn't always get all the details right, but there has been much noted of the increase in profits that Deere has made over the pandemic, really, and the last year and a half, and how out of sync the profits are, and certainly the pay to top executives as compared to what the amounts are for workers who are actually creating the product. And is that part of the conversation, is just what is happening over the last couple of years?
Certainly. And I don't think that that's unique here to what's going on at John Deere and the UAW negotiations, because if you look at Kellogg's over in Omaha and at other places throughout the country, if you look at trainers that are on strike, if you look at nurses that are on strike, you look at or on strike, if you look at so many different workplaces throughout the country, that is, the pandemic laid bare so many issues that were going on, whether it's low pay or insufficient benefits and benefits that aren't good enough, health and safety of workers right now as well. And, because of that, a lot the folks who are still working are saying we've had enough and we're not going to take it anymore. And meanwhile, you've had also a lot of people, and this is where I think unions or organized labor and even non-union workers feel that they have somewhat of an upper hand in the conversation right now, is that there has been a worker shortage. You've had a mass exodus of people who have left the workforce, and they're not sitting at home on unemployment. They are folks left the workforce over pay, over benefits, and that may not be the case with every single employer, but a lot of people are reevaluating their place in the workforce and their place in life right now.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit at a very personal level from a worker's perspective. When workers go on strike, what happens at that very personal level? Yes, they go and they are on the picket line, but in regard to pay, in regard to benefits, there was much about healthcare benefits with John Deere taking that away and then magically giving it back. And so at that very personal level for a worker, what's the impact of a strike?
So even when you hear these massive numbers that might be in something called a strike fund, that really doesn't first of all, you never know how long a strike is going to go. So you don't know exactly. You need to have months of savings leading up to something like this. Really, a worker does, because once you go on strike, my understanding, for at least and it may vary from place to place. Some, I believe Kellogg's, for example, does not have a strike fund, earning any income. W members that are on strike, their strike fund, I believe, is something like $275 a week. That might help you pay a bill, but it's going to be a massive drain on really going to test the social network, I think, of all of these communities, because $75 is not much to be able to get by on from week to week, pay a bill, but outside of that, it's not much. So this is serious, and that workers really do think that they have the ability to make these sacrifices, hopefully in the short term, to make Deere a better place to work, not just for themselves, but this is a multi-generational company. They're fighting to make this a better place for their children and grandchildren to be able to work.
Are there protections when workers go on strike? Are there protections in terms of like mortgages and rent and credit cards, those kind of things, of if a worker is not able to pay all those bills with that low amount of weekly money? Are there protections, legal protections for workers?
For the most part, no. But what we have seen in many, many communities, leading to this and beyond, we've had many companies, small businesses especially, step up in the community. There's been a ton of community support where banks have been trying to work with people on things like that. And in addition, whether it's a deal on food or something like that, you've had lots of social service agencies from the nonprofit sector stepping up and helping out as well. You've had lots and lots of donations that have poured in, from just concerned community members and things like that. And so, are there things to help people get through that? Yeah, most of it comes from the community. As things shift, things are going to be, the needs of each local are going to change a little bit, so as it's starting to get colder and colder, one of the things that people are going to need more of is propane, or they're going to be needing wood for burn barrels. They're able to have them, or there might be those hand warmer things, that go in your pockets. Those are all very that, like I said, as it gets colder out, those are items that I think are going to become more and more useful.
Yeah, it's oops, I'm hearing an echo also. Hopefully that's okay. For the communities to step up and support workers. I'm not sure why I am hearing the echo. We're having a little bit of a sound issue here, but we're going to trudge on. Talk to us a little bit about the history of strikes and whatever. I mean, I know you're not old enough to know all of this, but you've worked in the field for long enough, and kind of the history of strikes and their impact over the years, whether that's in Iowa or nationally.
Sure, absolutely. So, strikes used to be, before we had, the National Labor Relations Act, in the 1930s. Before we had things like that, strikes could be very, very violent, and fortunately, a lot of companies would hire sometimes called Pinkertons. Pinkertons were kind of the Pinkerton Detective Agency was kind of the union busting group out there. And even in some places, whether it was in West Virginia or whether it was in Colorado, especially around coal mining, you had all-out war, sometimes between the company and the union. At some point, usually, things like that lead to legislative change. So another example of strikes leading to legislative change too, I think, in the late 60s and early 70s, in this, you had the Des Moines firefighter strike, you had the Keokuk teacher strike, you had a lot of public sector unions that were starting to feel that they needed to have the ability to negotiate. And and so at the time you had a Republican legislature and a Republican governor, but basically said, hey, we will let you, we will legislatively put in place the pieces for you to be able to negotiate, and in exchange, you won't have the ability to strike. And as we saw in 2017, that was for public sector workers, and as we saw in 2017, they took just about every single bargaining right away. The only mandatory subject of bargaining is base wage. And they left in that no strike clause as well. So, but over the years, withholding labor, and I really hate talking about skilled labor versus unskilled labor and all those sorts of things, but people who really know how to do their job, and that you can't really bring in strike breakers to do very easily. That withholding their labor has been the way that they've been able to secure economic gains for themselves and their families, and quite frankly their communities as well. And so it's been a very useful tool. Nobody wants to go on strike, but sometimes that is what's warranted, given the situation. So we've had not a lot recently in Iowa, but we've had big ones over the years. In the 30s, we had Maytag was on strike, and in Newton, and you had the National Guard was called out. You had lots of labor strife in this state before, but this isn't new. I just think that we're on the front end of something that's much bigger here in America.
Yeah, and I think that it's important for people to understand the history of labor unions and working for worker rights, whether it is workers that are actually part of the labor or not, because you all have historically been on the front lines of fighting for worker rights in general, which helps not only people who are in unions, but eventually also helps people who don't have the ability to be part of a labor union or choose not to, I guess, also. But and a lot of the progress that we've made over the decades really has been because of labor and organized labor. And I think it's important for people to understand that.
Yeah, so I mean, there's some really obvious examples. For example, child labor, comes to mind, right? The fact that you have a weekend, that didn't happen by accident. Whether it's some of those the OSHA, right? Pressuring OSHA to be signed, that happened under Richard Nixon. There's a lot of labor reform that happened throughout the years. Plus, things that you wouldn't necessarily consider labor reform, but things that are good for everyone. One of the major supporters of the Social Security Act and things like that. Organized labor was behind a lot of that. But even if I look at over the past maybe 3 or 4 sessions here since, in 2017, clearly they took a lot of rights away. But the one thing that we have been able to hold off probably for the last 4 or 5 years, I think, has been major cuts to unemployment. There's certain things we weren't able to do anything about, like the governor ending pandemic unemployment this year. That was something that she was able to unilaterally do. But one of the bills that we've seen at the legislature consistently has been removing 13 weeks from a employment in a situation like where there is a plant closing, which is a major deal if you think about how, and especially illustrated now by these, big of a part you can see John Deere is a part of these communities. But if a plant or a business leaves town, it's going to have a major impact on the community. And so being able to have some unemployment dollars there to help keep that community afloat is incredibly important. But not just that, they would like to institute a 1-week waiting period for unemployment benefits. That is something that we have successfully fought off as well. And we've been able to do this with our allies as well. I think that recognized in organized labor, we're not able to do everything that we have been able to do in the past, and that not only are we willing, but we're really happy to be working with great coalition partners around a lot of different issues.
I think that one of the strengths in Iowa, if we have any, is, at least up at the Capitol, is that we do have a really strong progressive community of organizations that, we have your back, you have our back kind of thing. And I have always been grateful and impressed with the labor movement in Iowa and how you see the big picture. And not only AFL-CIO, but ICA and AFSCME and others, that you understand the impact of some of these social justice issues on workers. And it may not be obvious on the surface, but you understand the impact at the depth of all of that. And am always grateful when labor can be on board and whatever the issue may be. And I don't know that folks really understand that, how much the progressive organizations work together collectively for the common good.
Absolutely. We all do work together for the common good. And sometimes we're able to say things that for one way or for one reason or another, other folks aren't able to say. And I certainly don't have any problem doing that. Whenever there's a new huge tax cut, sometimes I wonder, gosh, why isn't so-and-so speaking about this, and they may have strategic reasons why they don't. But when it comes to tax policy, that's something that affects everybody. And we want to see a fair and equitable tax system. Sometimes it does feel a little bit lonely in that sometimes it does really feel like it's just a couple of groups plus ourselves and the teachers, and that's not the case with everything. There's some things that maybe we're not able to be front and center on, and that other folks are able to be. So
yeah, it's it takes a village.
Yep, absolutely.
So where are we headed in Iowa on worker rights and issues? You talked about a couple of pieces of legislation and attacks on worker rights from the legislature, but if you had a crystal ball, where do you think we're headed with worker rights? And is it same old, or going one way or the other?
It's interesting. if you listen to the last debate that happened during the legislative session, where we're going to be giving unemployment benefits, and we're not in the business of arguing against unemployment benefits for anybody who's made it through no fault of their own, but I don't know that it's necessarily the most appropriate thing for us to be giving unemployment people use vaccination, but that's another story. I think ultimately when ABI and some of these other groups come around and say, well, we don't have enough money in the unemployment trust fund, it strengthens our argument to say, well, you certainly seem to have enough to give it to people, who are refusing vaccinations. I do anticipate that unemployment bill will come back, but I really don't think that it's honestly going to move the needle here at all when it comes to our workforce shortage problems. If you think about the fact that since the beginning of the pandemic, something like 92,000 people have left the workforce, and there's something like, I believe, 18,000 people or so that are on unemployment. And by the governor now going to require 4 work searches a week, I don't know that does employees or employers, prospective employees or employers any good necessarily. We're really honing in on these 18,000 people when we should be asking ourselves, okay, why did the other 4/5 leave the workforce? And a lot of it, again, I think I mentioned this earlier, but a lot of it has to do with pay. A lot of it has to do with benefits. A lot of it has to do with safety and health on the job and exactly how they have been treated throughout this entire thing. So many people have been called heroes and essential, and they're really feeling quite expendable right now. So with all that said, I don't think that attacks on workers are going to go away. That's nothing that's going to change whatsoever as long as the current majority is in charge. And even moderate Republicans that I speak to who don't really like what's going on, don't feel that there are enough of them to even have a voice to speak out against what's going on.
Yeah, it's certainly a frustrating time. Tell folks how, back to the strike, tell folks how they should help, can help. And I know Kristen was finding, Kristen is behind the scenes for folks who don't know. And I think she was looking for the list that you gave to us a few weeks ago and published. But just talk a little bit about that and how, if they want to be supportive of workers who are on strike, how people in their communities can help.
Certainly. So I think that the list that I sent you kind of when this started, I don't think that it's really going to change very much, because that did include a lot of things like, hand warmers and wood for burn piles and so on. This is all safe, by the way. It's not just fires on the street, so it's just to keep people warm, especially when it comes to food. Again, keep in mind we're coming up on Thanksgiving, we're coming up on Christmas. When it comes to food, non-perishable food items are very, very important, that probably have to keep a while. Again, we don't know how long necessarily this strike is going to go on, but we need to be for quite some time. I know that Deere has some deep pockets. But if you, wherever you live in the state that is nearest, I would get in touch with, I think I provided to you some phone numbers for the local union halls in Iowa that are affected by this, and that, to give them a call and, I've got these goods. How's the best way to bring them in, or is there some other preferred method? Because one thing that I've learned, every union does every kind of action in a different way. And in this particular case, I've noticed that the United Auto Workers have left a lot of this sort of stuff up to their locals, and so I would defer to the locals as to the best way to get it to you, but as far for you to get it to them, but as far as what they need, non-perishable food, things to keep them warm, things like that.
Yeah. Thank you. And Kristen did put the information in the chat. We kind of shortened it a little bit or combined categories.
Sure.
But hopefully folks will take advantage of that. And if you have a UAW hall in your area or nearby, doesn't have to be specific to your area, please do reach out to them and see how you can help. Charlie Wishman, thank you for all of your work and for your efforts on behalf of workers in Iowa. Interfaith Alliance is always proud to work alongside you when we can, and I know this has been a tough 4 years plus, probably, but we're grateful for all the work that AFL-CIO does in our state on behalf of workers. So.
Thank you, Connie, and appreciate working with you as always, and with Interfaith Alliance, and you work, and I'll see you sometime soon.
Thanks. And for folks who are watching, thank you for being with us and for listening in on the conversation. If you are new to us, you can sign up for email by going to our website, interfaithallianceiowa.org. We, of course, are on Facebook and YouTube, but also on Instagram and Twitter. And so you can follow us there. And I always say at the end of our conversations to please register to vote. Or if you're already registered to vote, please help somebody else register to vote. It matters in our democracy. And for now, please stay safe and take care and have a great week. Thank you so much.